This is keeping it as simple as possible, breaking it down to a numbers game and just to where you don't have to think about it. What does Georgia have to do in order to make the college football playoff? Because as we saw a year ago, just making it gives you an opportunity to win, right? Ohio State didn't have a bye. They weren't a conference champion. Still, they were the best team. They wanted to win, but you just need a spot in the dance. And all it's going to take for Georgia is 10 wins. That's the simplest way to put it. It's all it took a season ago to get Georgia in there, the 11th win and the bye week with the conference championship win over Texas. That was sprinkles. That was icing. But to get to the cake, you just need to win those 10 football games. It all boils down to that. Georgia's got a 12-game schedule that is very difficult. It's one of the more difficult ones across the sport. I think that there are a lot of them, especially in the SEC, where you go, man, that's just tough. Georgia's got one of those schedules. But keeping it simple, all Georgia needs to do to get back to the college football playoff is win 10 games, right? It'd be nice to have a playoff bye and to be ranked as 1 through 4, and that eliminates a game like Georgia dealt with last year. Obviously ended up losing to Notre Dame in that first game that they played in the college football playoff, dealing with quarterback change, and they just got beat that day by the Irish. But that's the simple way to put it. Just got to win 10 games. I think that notion is the same this year. Let's look at last year's bracket, last year's conference standings, and just kind of all of the schedule, right? Because if you have a 2-game margin for error, if you're Georgia, I think you got to feel pretty good going just thinking, if you're Kirby Smart, it's every game is do or die. You got to win every single game. But in the back of your mind, in the back of the program's mind, it's got to feel a little bit better than it did, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, where the margin for error was 1 game. And there was a 0-game margin for error in 2023 when Georgia didn't make the college football playoff after going 12-0 in the regular season and losing to Alabama by a field goal in the conference championship. Their margin for error was like nothing. Sorry, I hit the mic. It was nothing. Well, now you get 2. They got it last year. Will they need it this year? Plus, I think that's a pretty easy cutoff baseline for them to reach. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post. SEC Media Days are this coming week. We're inching closer and closer to this college football season. The video game's out, so that's taking a little bit of my time up at night, the college football video game. All of my buddies are starting to talk about college football a little more. I'm starting to get questions, right? Playing golf with some people, getting questions from my dad's friends. We're back. College football is back. You won't really get to see games until August 23rd, right? I think that's the week 0 weekend. But we're inching closer. Media days and week 0. It'll all be coming up really quick. Fall camp will all be coming up really quick. Dogpost.com. Just stay up to date with everything. Stay on the website. Check out the newsletter. You want your fix, right? This is, for some of you, you get in trouble if you're consuming our content too much. I've talked to a lot of the wives out there that watch us, and I know you're getting in trouble, and I know a lot of the wives watch us as well. Thank you, and make sure you're checking out dogpost.com too. That was a little bit convoluted, but it was everything that I wanted to say. So Georgia, the schedule, you know the schedule. We've talked about it. Marshall, Austin, PA, Tennessee, Bama, Kentucky, Auburn, Ole Miss, Florida, Mississippi State, Texas, Charlotte, Georgia Tech. All right, that's the 12-game schedule. The margin for error is 2. And I think that you have to feel pretty good about that compared to just a couple of years ago, like I said, where there wasn't a margin for error. And in a sense, they got screwed over there in December when they lost to Alabama in the SEC championship game. You don't have to worry about that. You don't even have to worry about getting a playoff bye, which is likely going to be held by the Big Ten champion, the SEC champion, and depending how it shakes up, another conference champion or just 2 at-larges. If it was last year and the new rules with last year, it would have been 2 SEC teams and 2 Big Ten teams. And if that's your margin, just getting to the SEC championship game and even losing that and still being able to make the top 4, then we're talking about a 3-game margin for error potentially and still having a bye. That's the situation for Georgia. It's much simpler. Now, that's the situation for most schools, especially in the Big Ten and the SEC. But when you just boil it down, it's a lot simpler, and the path to get there, easier. Finishing it off, not as easy, right? Because you got to go through more teams in the end, in the actual dance, in the actual playoff. But if you look at Georgia's schedule, I did this a week or two ago and just went through it. One, Georgia's going to be favored in all of these games, right? Unless they end up losing early in the season or Alabama or Texas just looks like some juggernaut, the Dogs are going to be the favorite in every single game this season. They're about a 5.5-point favorite over Tennessee, about 2.5 over Texas. I think it was about a 4-point over Alabama. Double-digit favorite over a good bit of teams, near double digits against teams like Auburn and Florida. They're expected, according to Vegas, according to the odds makers, to win every single one of these games. So they're going to be projected to go 12-0 when you look at it that way. The line's about 10. The over-under, I think, is 9.5 for them to win. Which two games are they most likely to lose, right? So let's look at it from that perspective. Say your margin for error is 2. You can be 10-2 and make the college football playoff. Say 9-3 is your cutoff. If you're 9-3, you're probably on the outside looking in just because how deep the conference is. And they're going to want to let other teams in, right? And we're likely headed towards another political situation in terms of the actual playoff committee and picking these games. As we've seen over and over again, the criteria is never the same. And the criteria is not even the same when you judge school to school each year. The committee has been a little ridiculous to me over the last few years, but if your margin for error is 2, which 2 are they most likely to lose? Is it one of the road games when they go up to Knoxville in September and it's Gunner's first start on the road? Is that Auburn, which is going to be a night game, right? They haven't released the time, but it's probably going to be a 7:30 Eastern kick if I had to guess. Is it that? Do they slip up against Texas or Ole Miss or Alabama at home? People are starting to hype up Austin Simmons of Ole Miss a little bit more. I think it'll be difficult to replace what they had on the defensive line because they're not as locked and loaded as a Georgia or a Texas or an Alabama in that regard. Does the Alabama mental hump, is that difficult to jump over even though you're at home and at night this time? I tell you what, Georgia fans, if you're paying a G, 2 G's to go watch Georgia lose to Alabama in Sanford Stadium at night, that's going to be a tough scene for you and tough money spent. But look, Florida, if you ask some people, is going to be one of the more difficult games on Georgia's schedule. People expecting DJ Lagway and that offense to take a step forward. I tell you what, the vibe around Billy Napier is they're more than happy to keep him around for another year, right? There was a question during the middle of last season is, hey, is this guy going to get canned by the end of the year? Why don't they just go ahead and do it since they're going to lose all these games? They end up rallying around Napier. I remember sitting in that press conference room and seeing the athletic directors and the way they all interacted, and I said, this is a connected group. They're expecting to take a step forward after bringing in a couple of transfers, after allowing Lagway to develop. So there are difficult games all around Georgia's schedule. They could slip up against Georgia Tech like they nearly did last year. This time it's a neutral site in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. We don't really know at the end of the day, but the two that are the most likely to lose, I think one of those road games, just because that's how these things go in the conference. And then if Texas is as good as people say, if Texas is really as good as people think, and this isn't a marginal difference between the two squads, then yeah, maybe the Longhorns go to Athens in November. Arch Manning's on a roll. Maybe Arch Manning's a Heisman candidate at that point in the year. He's looking for a signature performance to cement that, right? There's all sorts of possible storylines with that once you get towards that portion of the season. But I think if you're Georgia and you're just listening to me ramble about this and you're looking at this schedule, you got to feel good that you're going to knock in 10 of these games and win 10 of these games and make the college football playoff. Last year's college football playoff field, outside of the conference championships, right? So like the at-larges, SMU, Indiana, Notre Dame, Tennessee, who had 2 losses and a bad one, a really bad one at Arkansas, Ohio State, who had a terrible loss against Michigan at the end of the season. You can afford to lose a couple of these, and you can afford to lose one that you're really not supposed to lose. And in the case of Vegas, they're not supposed to lose any of them because they're projected favorites in all these games. But let's say Georgia loses at home to Texas and at Auburn, and they're like ranked number 8 or 9. You're still in the college football playoff. You've still got an opportunity. You'll probably have to go on the road in that first game, and that'll be really difficult. But that's your margin of error. And here's the thing: Georgia was 10-2 last year, made the SEC championship, and then won that. They ended up getting a bye. They can lose to Tennessee. They could lose to Auburn, or 2 of these schools, and still pull off being one of the top 4 teams in the country. Because look, I know that things change with the format, but the SEC and the Big Ten champions will be ranked in the top 4. They will get playoff byes. That notion will not change. It's just the nature and how they're going to get ranked. People are not going to look at the SEC champion and say that's not one of the 4 best teams in college football. So the concept that these conference championships don't matter all of a sudden, to me, that's BS. And it's just, especially for the Big Ten and the SEC. And honestly, for a season like this year where the ACC's got Clemson, Florida State wants to make a comeback, which I don't quite believe in, and then you've got Miami. I don't know how the Carson Beck experiment is going to work, but the ACC championship is going to matter a lot too. It mattered last year between SMU and Clemson. Clemson wins that game, both of them get in. So I don't want to hear it that these conference championships don't matter. And it's good for Georgia that they know, hey, we could lose 2 games. If you're Georgia, you look at that schedule and say, what happens if you lose to Auburn? You'll be fine. You could still be a top 4 team. You could still have the playoff bye. And as we saw a year ago, getting a playoff bye doesn't necessarily matter. All you got to do is get in that thing. The margin for error has grown so much. And 2023 is such a good pinpoint mark to look at and to compare it to, because that team was way better than last year's team, and it didn't even make the college football playoff. Margin for error, much better than it used to be. I think you feel good about that if you're Georgia or any of the other schools that are in a similar position. Dawgpost.com, media days are Monday, and Tuesday we'll be there. Everything will be on the site. We'll be doing some stuff here, Matt, Dean, and I all together. So make sure you're staying tuned over the next week, and I appreciate you watching. Links are in the description down below.